So yes, welcome to the afternoon session, particularly for those of you who've not been in the room this morning. I know we segmented it into two halves, so if you're joining us for the afternoon, you're very welcome. So this afternoon opening plenary session is a really interesting, hopefully special concept. What we're doing is hearing from people who've been central to hosting events on climate resilience finance during the week, and inviting you to use this opportunity to tell you briefly what happened in those events and what the key messages were. And then towards the end of the session, and this is your warning, is we will be putting up a Menti code, and we're asking you as the experts in the room to share your key message coming out of today or your experiences this week, which will build us and begin to build us a outcome document from the summit. And then just as a reminder, when we come to the closing plenary, we will be, to the closing plenary participants, putting those messages to them and asking them to reflect on them. So that's the kind of format for this afternoon. And then just as a reminder for the afternoon segment, immediately after this plenary, we will be back into those breakout challenge sessions. So we'd invite you to finish the plenary and then head to the rooms that you want to head to, and a reminder that the program is on your QR code. So with that, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Kerry from Accounting for Sustainability, the Executive Director for Capital Markets, who is going to tell us a little bit about Accounting for Sustainability and then take us through the session. Kerry, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. So, as Tom said, I work for Accounting for Sustainability. You may or may not have heard of us, but we've been around for nearly 21 years. We were set up by the then Prince of Wales, His Majesty King Charles III, with the mission to ensure that sustainable business is business as usual. And we work across the entire global finance and accounting community, convening networks. So we do events, we do the knowledge, resource, education, the kind of training side as well. And one of the kind of core things we do is work with key cohorts of people across the economy. We set up a network of group CFOs, Chief Financial Officers, around the world. We bring them together who are leading in this space to really use their position to influence across their own networks, their own organisation, and moving forward. We also run a network for accounting body networks, so looking at the accounting community, how do you embed the principles of sustainability into the education piece and the CPD. And then my favourite, because I lead it, the network for pension fund chairs. So we run a network for chairs of large pension funds of all different types, DB, DC, hybrid, really coming together to create that space to grow their confidence and knowledge, to then be able to have those deeper conversations with their asset managers and their advisors. So across our different our different stakeholder groups, we'll be doing a lot of work on, what does resilience finance mean? What are the particular barriers? What are the levers to pull? One of the particular areas that we've been looking at quite a lot, and it'd be interesting to know if my colleagues on this stage are doing as well, is around the scenario piece and ensuring that the scenarios approach that whether you're an investor, pension fund, or a CFO, that you are you're really kind of comfortable with the assumptions that are being made, that you are comfortable that the physical risks, the tipping points have been embedded. And so we've been really looking at what does a top-down scenario approach look like to complement the bottom-up approach, and how do you embed that into the strategic asset allocation, the investment process. So that's a little bit about accounting for sustainability. So this session is to really hear from others, not me, on what they've been up to, what are the events that they've been running, and getting the kind of key insights and maybe some key takeaways. So if I can ask Namrata Ginoya, who is the Strategic Policy Lead at Global Resilience Partnership, to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Hello, everyone. As you may know, Global Resilience Partnership, we host the Resilience Hub every year at the COP, along with Atlantic Council. Jorge is here. You may have heard from him just before this session as well. So now we've started engaging on the Resilience Hub at the London Climate Week and the New York Climate Week as well. So on the 24th, we had an entire day of programming with the Atlantic Council, especially focusing on action, learning, and a bit more on collaboration as well. And we had 3 powerful discussions where we mostly focused on decision-making, finance, technology, and also developing business strategy around resilience. One of the key themes that came up was that decision makers still urgently need improved tools on decision-making for resilience. And hence, the resilience science must-knows, which have been developed with Atlantic Council, GRP, Stockholm Resilience Center, and Future Earth, with inputs from over 200 academicians, are one of the ways forward that can fill the gap and provide more clarity on bringing investments for resilience across different sectors. We also had, we also heard a strong signal from the private sector, especially focusing on, I'll connect it with what Rachel Kite mentioned earlier today, which was that we are not capturing enough of what private sector is doing, especially they are already working on making infrastructure resilient and their own competitiveness more resilient as well. And so on 24th, we saw 17 companies, principals, who accepted the invitation to a closed-door meeting with the climate champions of COP30 at the high-level champion, with the high-level champion, and also shared how they would like to invest in adaptation and resilience. They are already doing that, and how they would like to improve that kind of cooperation through public-private cooperation. Basically mentioning that businesses are already doing these things. They are already leading on adaptation, and not because of charity, but also because it definitely and obviously reduces risk. There were a lot of examples on companies sharing how they've embedded resilience into their operations, and how they need all of our help in overcoming some of the challenges that still exist, like misaligned incentives, missing metrics, and a lack of clear pathways with governments, to co-invest with governments, actually. And at the same time, we saw a lot of reframing of resilience, not as a cost, but as a strategic advantage for all private sector, and basically everyone through actually taking forward digital innovation, AI. There were a lot of examples on using mobile financing as well throughout different examples. Basically helping a lot of private capital that can be unlocked, and basically help improve and modernize the systems through pricing, data, standards, all of these. So across sessions, 3 messages. Communities definitely still need to be and should always be at the center of decision making. So as we go ahead and plan for all our financing support, do not look at them as beneficiaries, but as leaders who can support us. Private sector needs clear enabling signals and environment, and the science is here to guide us. And we will see you all at New York Climate Week, continuing this discussion, as well as the hub will be there at COP30 as well.
I'm supposed to do this, but I'm going to introduce every person. So thank you, Namrata. So what I got from that was around that the private sector is actually doing a lot, but we're just not capturing it. And so more needs to be done on telling the story, and then reframing resilience as a strategic advantage, and ensuring that communities and its people-led communities are decision-making. So thank you. So over to Anthony. Anthony Hobley is Deputy Chair, Climate Risk and Resilience of Howden Group, and you're going to be speaking on the De-risking Summit.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to, I think, touch on the degree to which finally insurance and I think de-risking is on the agenda, and why it is actually so critical to creating, you know, the question that everyone's asking is how do you create the investment case? And you quite often get people, well, mitigation has really taken off now, so, you know, and adaptation, resilience financing is just behind. But of course there are fundamental differences between the two. Mitigation investment is largely based on technologies now that are becoming better than the incumbent technologies, and by default they create a value stream. The case for adaptation and resilience is not so clear cut. It is about addressing future risk. And quite simply at the moment, our ability to put a price on that is almost non-existent. Most of what we have is backward looking. And the sector that I'm now in is, you know, is one of the key culprits. Everybody, whenever you meet them, oh, insurance, you must be totally on top of this. The reality, I've been shocked to find over the last couple of years, is the insurance industry is right at the back of the queue, back of the bus. It has been MIA in terms of actually proactively de-risking the resilient net zero transition. It's got very good at being defensive on an annual basis, pricing risk and increasing risk, and that's great until it's not, because at some point, if it is not part of de-risking investment, the risks will get too great and there will no longer be an insurable market. And I think, well, also, I just want to do a shout out for London Climate Action Week. What an incredible week. Did anyone expect it to have taken off quite as much as it has? I've just read in chats on various chats, the WEF, the World Economic Forum alumni group is going crazy with like how London's probably supplanted New York. Obviously, let's see, but it is quite incredible. But whether you're talking about New York Climate Week, London Climate Week, the COP, go back 2 or 3 years, or 3 years, and there was almost nothing, there was almost no discussions on insurance, other than maybe some very technical, incremental conversations, but no conversations about the paradigm shift. Has anyone ever wondered, with all of the data that we are generating from TCFD, TNFD, and all the other acronyms, those who have the power to make asset allocation decisions, investment decisions, are still making those decisions. You know, let's not kid ourselves, even with all the massive growth we're seeing in climate and now nature finance, it is still a very small percentage of the overall investment. Most of the decisions are still being made as if climate is not happening. Why is that? Anyone got a thought on, you know, that? And for me, one of the most exciting things, whether it was our second de-risking summit at Mansion House on Monday, conversations at a range of other events, is I think for the first time we're beginning to ask that question, and what will it take to put a price on that, and actually where is the insurance industry in terms of doing that? The answer I've had when I've actually talked to people in those positions is they're like, well, we get it, and we've got all this data, but you know, between you and me, all of that data it may as well not exist, unless and until you work out how to translate that data into a forward price curve on risk. Because actually, as a board member, as someone on an investment committee, I make decisions all the time based on forward price curves for power, for coffee beans, for freight prices, you know, that go 8 to 10 years into the future. That's just normal. I don't have a forward price curve for these climate risks you're talking about. I just have a lot of very qualitative reports. So until you put a framework around that, and I think one of the exciting conversations was we saw a piece of innovative work that was sort of very much trialed this week, that the European Investment Bank did together with Howden, which actually they had realised how much the drought in Europe cost the agricultural sector a few years ago. If that one event has cost us tens upon tens of billions, what is the cost already? And what is the cost if we do nothing between now and 2050? And we looked at every single commodity, major material, agricultural commodity, right the way down to the regional level. And the price, what it's costing already is pretty shocking. It's something like 25 billion already. If we do nothing, that will get up to something like the mid-40s, 43 to 45 billion a year if we do nothing. Some commodities, where they're being grown now and have been grown for centuries, you won't be able to grow, or the harvest will basically halve. And some years, they'll be totally wiped out on an ever-increasing basis. In a catastrophic year, it'll be as much as 70 billion, which is pretty much equal to the existing agricultural budget. But of course, there's an even bigger question there that Europe's looking at politically. How does it feed people if that happens? But what it also means is now with that framework in place, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting conversations I've seen across events at our summit and other events, you can now go to individual companies. You couldn't really do that without a framework within which they could operate. So there is a public-private role here to create that framework within which an individual bank, company, city, region can then look at its cost and exposure. And then you have a very clear case for why you would invest to address that cost, which doesn't exist at the moment. So I think that was one of the most exciting, things that's starting to emerge, that question about how do we create those forward price curves for climate risk and get it down to the sort of granular level that it needs to be. Essentially, how do we take all that backward-looking data, use tools like AI, and then run it, use the climate models, economic or physical, to run that forward and start to create that pricing. Because I tell you, I'm absolutely convinced until we do that, there is no investment case. There's no clear investment case other than maybe a public and a qualitative one. Once you do that, it just becomes normal finance. And I think that's critical. I think the other point I would just make very quickly that came out, I think, in a number of sessions, particularly around the nature base and working with some of the country platforms, was some work we have done with the investors. And we think actually we've got many of the insurance solutions to unlock flows of investment, but they're just not being utilised because there's a big disconnect and lack of understanding between mainstream finance and what I would call the contingent capital markets, so the insurance markets. And we could probably increase the flows of climate finance by as much as 40% if we're much more effectively using the insurance markets that already exist. So I think there's a lot of other conversations that came out, but for me, I think those are the two things I would probably like people to take away. And this shouldn't just be an insurance conversation amongst insurers. This is not going to happen unless everyone here, and everyone here in some way or other in their private or business lives uses insurance. You now need to be demanding more from the insurance industry, and we need to be working to create this forward approach to risk, because otherwise we're racing into the future, looking in our rear view mirror down a very windy, dark road with no headlights on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And I think you summed it up, so I don't really need to do that. But the important point about working with insurers, we do a lot with the insurance advisor, pension, working very, very collaboratively, something I didn't think would be possible. So I think there is the art of the possible here. Okay, we're going to speak to Juliana Tinoco, Executive Coordinator at Alianza. Oh my goodness, I think I'll let you do the rest. Sorry, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Juliana, I'm Brazilian, Brazil-based, and I'm the executive coordinator of Alianza, Fondos del Sur. It sounds better in Spanish, that's why we've kept it in Spanish. In English, it should read the Socio-Environmental Funds of the Global South. So we are a network of Global South-led and Global South-oriented philanthropic funds that are focusing on grant making for community-based in territories across the Global South. So we are a network of, today we're 16 members and expanding, and also a very young network. And as I took on this role 2 years ago, I realized that we are relating to a much wider ecosystem of Global South-led and Global South-focused philanthropic organizations that have been doing this work of supporting community-based grassroots organizations across many regions of Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, which is also the focus of our network. And why is that needed? I just wanted to briefly relate to the topic of today's summit. And we had Ana Toni representing the Brazilian COP30 presidency here on a panel just before lunch, speaking about financing for adaptation and reminding us of the sad truth that people are already dying. But I wanted to emphasize that people are also surviving. And much of that is thanks to solutions that derive from territories, thanks to community resilience, thanks to innovation and social technology, thanks to social organizing. So there's a lot that relates to communities, not only because people in territories, be it forest, urban, rural, regardless, we're focusing on youth, on gender. It's not only a question and a matter of vulnerability, but they're also the solutions. They prove to have solutions for a lot of the issues that they are being mentioned when we're talking about adaptation, resilience, but also mitigation and intersecting agendas of climate, environmental justice, and human rights. So this is the wider focus of what these philanthropic actors have been doing for many decades, the ones that are under the Alianza network, but many others. And what we want to do now is to mainstream this ecosystem in order to scale the possibility of us reaching communities with resources, with capacities. And that's what I came to London to do. And we had the soft launch of this new initiative. It's called the Global South House. So the Global South House emerges as a strategic response to the persistent inequalities in international funding flows addressing the climate, environmental, and social crisis. It is both a physical and symbolic space for the articulation and the mobilization of those actors with focus on producing, generating knowledge, disseminating the solutions that they are working on, and influencing the wider conversation on financing and funding for climate, for nature, for people. And what I came to London to do is to start the conversation. We're actually properly launching it virtually on July 30. But our main goal for this year is we're going to have a physical space at COP30. So 7 days of programming focused only on the debate around financing and funding from a Global South angle. I'm here at this moment to invite you all to follow this initiative because we really want to amplify this conversation, and especially with other sectors. And just moving on to my takeaways from the experience about talking about this project this week is that we do hear a lot of conversations on how can we actually make sure that the debates are not in silos, that peers are not only talking to peers, but expanding conversations across. So how can we make sure the philanthropic actors, they are moving resources to communities on the ground, can be part of a wider conversation with the financial sector, with banks, with investment, impact investors, with all the other players that have decision-making over resource flows and power dynamics. And because there's a big ecosystem of those philanthropic actors in the Global South, and so we really want to make sure those conversations and those solutions are co-created. So I invite you all to follow this initiative. For those that are going to be in Belém to visit us, there's going to be a big agenda, and hopefully we'll move forward and be in London again next year and in all other spaces that needs to be occupied with this message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliana. And one kind of key message that was coming out of some of the sessions that I was doing this week was around ensuring that we don't talk about global to local, but it's global to local to global to local to global to local. And I think that's very important. Right, our last speaker for today of this session is Kate Levick, who's the Associate Director, Finance and Resilience at E3G, who have done a lot of work on LCAW from right at the beginning. So welcome, Kate, to the stage.
Thank you, Kerry. So some of you who were here in the morning will have heard from E3G CEO Nick Mabey, who founded LCAW. So at E3G, we're obviously thrilled at what a big week it's been this week and how it's been growing every year and really has gone particularly stellar this year. I'm just going to talk to you about some of what came out of E3G's flagship event. We had a few, but our flagship was called the State of Climate Politics. It took place on Tuesday afternoon. And as a think tank which focuses on the politics of climate change, we come at it from a number of different angles, but I'll just tell you a few concise snippets from what came out of the resilience part and the finance part of the agenda. So we had a panel on resilience. It was hosted by James Davey, who's a former climate science lead at Department of Energy Security in the UK. It featured the Netherlands climate envoy with the wonderful name His Royal Highness Jaime de Bourbon de Parma, and also Eamon Ryan, the former Environment Minister of Ireland. And key points that came out of that discussion is, 1.5, taking a real scientific and sort of blunt look at the situation. 1.5 is looking to be exceeded. So we need to reach net zero as soon as possible, but also to recognise the importance of building resilience at the same time. And I think we see that mainstreaming coming through very much this week. Noting that net zero framing is becoming more challenging in many jurisdictions, being much more politically contested, but there's also a lot of evidence that the underlying public support for economic transition remains strong. So actually further building public awareness and buy-in by democratising climate risk assessment and making that something that's more tangible for everybody will be a good thing to do. The change we're seeing and will see going forwards, increasingly will not necessarily be gradual. So climatic events in different global regions are correlated. We've heard people talking, I think, earlier this morning about, I think it was Nicola actually, talking about bread baskets and how, if several different food-producing key regions of the world get down at once, we have all sorts of issues. So global food system shocks are a possibility. The work of the NGFS, the central banks, and others on short-term scenarios for how to deal with those shocks is really timely and important. And we talked about models, scientific models for climate change. They have their uses, everyone knows they have their flaws, but we talked about how they can't really help you with granular on-the-ground planning and adaptation. That basically requires walking around and talking to people, and that's also very important. And then moving to the finance panel from that event, that was run by my colleague Rod Moore at E3G. We had Riran Marie Thomas, who's the CEO of the Green Finance Initiative. We had Sharjan Mirza from Pakistan, who's heads up their Private Power Infrastructure Board and Alternate Energy Board. Mafalda Duerte, who's the Executive Director of the Clean Climate Fund, and Vera Rodenhoff, who's the Deputy Director General of the German Ministry for Economy and Energy. So quite a different discussion. They talked about how ultimately the challenge is about matching investment timeframes to physical risk timeframes, and we know this requires some changes to how the financial system's designed. So when finance ministries go slow on those big financial reforms, what they're basically doing is saying that they're signing up to a warmer, costlier world because they're not doing that as fast as they could. Talking about concessional finance, we all know there are ways to get more impact out of existing concessional finance, but even in a best case scenario, we are going to need more. So we need to do the work of rebuilding public confidence in that and in aid and overseas assistance and so on over time. Why are we looking at spending 5% of GDP on military security and then not looking at a different massive source of insecurity? So there's a lot of work to do around that. And also a lot of focus right now on the possibility of new sources of public finance, for example, new levies such as an aviation tax. They talked about how the US, despite its positioning on energy right now, is not deaf to physical climate risk, and certainly the US insurance sector absolutely is not. And then that moved the conversation over to data. So data, more data is always needed. Investors overprice risk when they lack certainty. High risk perceptions inhibit investment. We know that. So the financial system needs to know what the real risks are and get to grips with climate change, but also really needs to much more reward the management of risk. So I hope those chime with a lot of other things that have been said here today. We're really pleased to see this this event today sort of bookending a great series of discussions at Climate Week.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing a little bit of the insight of what's happened during the week. What I will ask you to do now, I know we're a little bit over time, but please do take a moment to do this. If you can log on to this Menti code, we would love you to share one key message with us coming out of either this week or today on climate resilience finance. And what I would encourage you to do is also not to say something like, oh, it's been an interesting week, or, but actually you are hugely expert, hugely experienced audience. So if you could just take a moment to try and craft a message that will then contribute towards the outcome from this meeting, that would be fabulous. And then once you are done so, you are very welcome to move to other sessions, and you will start to see messages come through on the screen as well. We will compose those, and as I mentioned earlier, have them ready for, summary ready for the final session. Thank you.